Hello everyone and welcome to Kiki Crochet. In this tutorial we are going to do one of the most important lessons about crocheting, and it will be on how to calculate the number of chains you need to start a project with, how to calculate the total rows needed, and how to calculate the total amount of yarn that you're going to need for your project. All of this we are going to learn how to do by crocheting a gauge, which is 10 by 10 centimeters or 4 by 4 inches. Okay, and by using our sample, our gauge, we can calculate all that I just mentioned. Now, it's very important to mention that depending on if you make a sample with such and such yarn and crochet hook, if you do the same stitch but with different yarn and different crochet hook, you will have to redo your sample and your calculations all over from the beginning. So when you change your yarn and the crochet hook, we always have to do the measurements again from the beginning. Also, if you do a different stitch, again, you have to do your measurements and your calculations from the beginning again. So let's see what the formulas are and how to do the calculations step by step. Math is our favorite because it helps us calculate the number of stitches that we want, so we don't have to frog our project every time. Okay, before you start any big project, we always need to work a sample. We always need to have our gauge so we know how to calculate. This takes like 10 minutes to do, right? And it saves you from frogging big projects. So we need to know, just so you don't have to be doing your gauge every time, your samples and your calculations, always write down the stitch that you're doing it for. Always write down the rule, the yarn that you're using, and the crochet hook. But please do not work your sample with the yarn that you were using, the light one and the 4mm, and use the same measurements when working with a thicker yarn and a bigger crochet hook. Even if you're using the same stitch, if you change your hook size or the yarn, please do your gauge all over again because the stitches are going to be different. Okay, so I have my gauge, and let's pretend that this is 4 inches by 4. So I have 25 stitches that give me my 4 inches width and 19 rows that give me 4 inches height. And I need to work a blanket that's square. It's 30 inches by 30 inches. So firstly, we're going to start by calculating the beginning chains, which is the width of the project. And what I need to know is I'm going to multiply the stitches of my sample that gave me the 4-inch width, in this case 25 stitches, times the inches that I need for my project. In this case the width is 30 inches, and I'm going to divide that number by the width of the sample, which is 4 inches. Okay, so let's start. I need to multiply the stitches of the sample, which were 25, times the inches that I need for my project, 30 inches, and I'm going to divide that number by the width of the sample, 4 inches. Okay, so 25 times 30. 25 times 30 is 750 divided by 4. The result is 187.5. Okay, so these are the chains that I need to start with. But because we cannot start with 187.5 chains, right? I need to round that number up or down depending on the multiples that I have, depending on the rule. My rule is multiples of 2, so this means any even number of chains. So to round it up to the next number, I'm going to start with 188 chains. Okay, 188 is an even number, Okay, 188 chains is going to give me 30 inches width. Now let's calculate the total rows that we're going to need, and this is the length of our project. So since we need to find the length of the project, I need to know the rows that gave me the 4 inches in my sample, and in this case I have 19. Okay, then I'm going to multiply that by the inches that I need for the length, in this case 30 inches, and I'm going to divide that number by the length of the sample, in this case 4 inches. So let's multiply the rows of our sample, 19 times the inches that I need for the length of my blanket, and I'm going to divide that by the length of the sample, divided by 4. Okay, so 19 times 30 is 570, and I'm going to divide that number by 4. And the result is 142.5. So these are the number of rows that I need. But because I cannot have 142.5 rows, I'm going to round that up to either 142 rows or 143 rows, depending on which one will be the row of single crochet. And I believe it's going to be the 143rd one, because the last row of repetitions was row 7, odd number of row. So you're probably going to have 143 rows. Okay, the last row, it will be the row of single crochet. Pretty easy, right? Now we're going to need to know how much yarn we're going to need for our sample. Now, in order to calculate the total yarn that you need to know how much yarn you used for this sample over here. And in order to know how much yarn you used, what I want you to do is take some yarn, take your measuring tape, okay, and measure about 6 inches of yarn. Okay, take your measuring tape and measure about 6 inches of yarn, and this before you start with your sample. Okay, round it up into a ball so you can crochet easier without your yarn getting tangled. Okay, so we have separated 6 inches of yarn, and now let's say that when I worked my sample I worked by using that yarn, and I have a little leftover yarn when I finished the sample. Once you cut the yarn and you fasten off, okay, take your measuring tape and measure how much yarn you have left. Okay, so let's say from the 6 inches of yarn that I made into a ball, I have left okay, I have a total of 6 inches of yarn into a ball. Okay, and when I finished my sample and I measured the yarn that was left over, I had 1 inch left over. So when you do that subtraction, the result is 5 inches. So this means that for my sample I used a total of 5 inches of yarn. Okay, so hold this in the side and let's do the 3 equations that we need. The first equation is the square inches of my sample. So I have my sample over here, and we worked, in order to find the square inches, I have 4 inches for the width and 4 inches for the length. And when you multiply the length times the width right over here, you get the square inches. So 4 by 4, okay, 4 times 4 give me 16 square inches. Okay, now I need to know for the second equation the square inches for the project that I'm going to crochet. So since I need to make a blanket that's 30 by 30, okay, 30 width times 30 length. I am multiplying these two numbers, and 30 times 30 is 900 inches squared. So I know the area of my sample and the area of my blanket, okay, that I need to crochet. So in the third equation, I'm going to multiply the inches of the yarn that I used in my sample, and I calculated that I need 5 inches, times the square inches that I need for my project, 900, and I'm going to divide that by the square inches of my sample. Okay, so since I made a 6-inch ball, and from that I had 1 inch left, this means that I used a total of 5 inches for my sample. So let's see how we're going to do our math. Okay, so the inches of the yarn that I used in the sample, I'm taking 5 times the square inches that I need, 900, and I'm dividing that number by the square inches of my sample, which is 16. Okay, so let's see, 5 times 900, okay, which is 4,500, divided by 16. Divided by 16, and the result is 281.25. And the result is 281.25 inches. Okay. Now I'm going to make those inches into meters. So 281.25 times 2.5, and the result is 703.125 meters of yarn that we're going to need. And since I know that in other countries yarns come into yards, we need to find out how many yards of yarn this 703.125 is. So we're doing our equation over here, and I get my 281.25 inches. Now I need to turn those inches into meters, so I am going to multiply that number by 2.5. So you always multiply by 2.5, okay? And the result is 703.125 meters. So I'm going to convert to yards, and I'm going to take this number, 7.03.125, and 1 meter equals 1.0936 yards, and the result is 769 yards of yarn that we're going to need to crochet. Okay, so I found out the inches of yarn that I used. I converted the inches into meters, and then I converted the meters into yards. I know you're kind of dizzy right now, but it's not that hard, okay? So every time that you want to convert from meters to yards, you always multiply by this number over here. And I need 769 yards of yarn. So how many skeins is this? So the skein that I just worked my sample is 361 yards. So I'm going to take the 769 yards that I need in total, and I'm going to divide by the yards that my yarn has, 361, and the result from that one is 769 divided by 361. Oops, I multiplied. Divided by 361, and the result is 2.13 skeins that I'm going to need. So in order to crochet this blanket into a square, I'm going to need to buy 3 skeins of yarn. Okay, so if you need, go over to see how to calculate again. I know this part down here might be a little confusing, but if you do it over and over again and you know what each number is, then you'll be able to understand why you're doing those equations and why you're doing this math, you know, these multiplications and divisions. So this is how to calculate the number of chains, the total rows, and how many skeins you're going to need depending on the sample that you're crocheting. Okay, and again, I'm going to repeat, please, if you're going to use a different yarn, a different crochet hook, you're going to need to do this whole process all over again. So this is how we do our calculations for the chains needed, the total rows, and the total yards that we're going to need for each project. I hope you save this on your file so you can refer back to it every time you need to do your formulas all over again for a new stitch. Thanks for watching, please subscribe, and if you like the video, please press like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. Thanks again, bye bye!